Good morning, everybody. My name is Alex Tom. I'm joined here by my colleague Avery Dixon, and we'll be the facilitators for this session. This session is the Organizational Wellness Technology Members Wellbeing Dashboard. And before we get started, I'll review some quick housekeeping notes, and then I will introduce our speaker and begin the session. So I would like to draw your attention to the bottom of the screen where you will find the Zoom toolbar. You can use the Q&A feature to submit questions throughout the presentation, and we'll review these questions at the end of the session and do our best to answer as many as possible. I should say perhaps use the chat, because I think we just changed that. Use the chat so that we could answer those questions at the end of the session. Please ensure that your microphone is on mute until the Q&A portion of this session. And please note that we will be recording this session to upload to the conference website for future viewing by those who have registered for the conference. You will be able to access the platform for 90 days following the conference. I would also like to remind everyone that we have closed captioning for all our sessions. If you click the CC icon below the video window on your screen, you could access this function. We also kindly ask that you complete the evaluation for this session by clicking on the session in the agenda on the virtual platform. There will be a survey button at the bottom of the session next to the join button, and your feedback is appreciated and will be used to inform future events such as this conference. And finally, we would like to respectfully ask all of you attending today's session to engage with each other thoughtfully and always consider the impact of your words and interactions on others. As facilitators, we will not tolerate any abusive and inappropriate behavior or hate speech, and will ensure that anyone who engages in such behavior is removed from this session. If you have been disturbed or affected by such an event, please do what you need to do. Take a break, step outside, practice deep breathing, or reach out to someone you trust. If you are in a crisis and require immediate support, please click on the FAQ icon on the conference homepage to access contact information for Connex Ontario. If you'd like to report an incident, contact the event manager, Sherry Shim, by either clicking on the assistance button on the top right, or text Sherry at 416-605-5975. Without further ado, I would like now to introduce you to our presenter. Our presenter is Jason McIlveen, and Jason is the Staff Sergeant, Organizational Wellness at the York Regional Police, and he's also the HSJCC co-chair at York Region South Simcoe. So over to you, Jason.
Well, thank you very much for having me this morning. Just a quick sound check. Can everyone hear me? Yep, good. Very good. All right, so today I'm going to do a presentation on what we call our Organizational Wellness Dashboard. And this is something that we've designed as a police service for our members to use to track their wellness. And it's interesting, since I've been going around and doing these presentations, I've delivered this to a number of different emergency services partners throughout the province. And there is a lot of interest to it, but there's also a lot of cross application to it. So, and I think you'll see that as we go through to anyone that has, deals with persons in crisis, or, people that have experienced trauma, and that trauma is passed from that individual to us. How can you keep track of that in terms of, your overall wellness? So, I'm just gonna share my screen with you now, and let's just hope that the portals work. And we get through it and into the next dimension. And I think you can see Alex, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay. All right. So at the bottom of we have a huge dashboard system at York Regional Police. We track everything. Where this particular application resides, is at the bottom under Wellness Pilot. We've actually moved out of the pilot phase and we're into phase 2 now. The first phase was frontline officers and our communicators. And phase 2 includes our investigators and the specialty units. So so you'll see that there's 3 dashboards. There's an organizational dashboard, a supervisor dashboard, and a member dashboard. We're going to focus on the member dashboard today for obviously for for the presentation, and I may touch on the supervisor dashboard. The organizational dashboard is something that our executive command team has sort of purview over, as well as our staff psychologists. We have two on, and it looks at broader trends in wellness across the organization. So let's just cross the threshold here. This should come up. And I apologize, it might be a little slow. You're going to see my dashboard coming up here. So I don't do calls. So my dashboard isn't particularly what I would call sexy. So what we've done is we've created a dashboard here, which has a sort of a better sort of overview of what an officer would see when they went to their dashboard. So just give me a second here, and I'm just going to call it up. And what you're seeing on this side is the filter for the page, and officers can filter in terms of the time that they want to look at, whether it's a year or a sort of defined period of time. We actually can go back fairly significantly back to 2016, and that's when we changed operating systems at York Regional Police. So we can go back to 2016 and look at these calls, believe it or not. So it's going to update this, and this is going to take you to a what the average officer would see on any given day when they went to their dashboard. And what people may not know is that every call that an officer goes to now is tracked. And so it's tracked on an intensity scale. So you can imagine that the more intense calls would have a higher score, and the more sort of the more least intense, or that sort of lack any intensity, would be given a lower score. And so an officer can look at the total number of calls that they've been to, or they can look at an aggregate score. The aggregate score, you would just switch to scores, and that would give you the score. And then that would be sort of the calls that they would see. Oh, sometimes when I do this, it gets a little bit choppy because of the sort of the top part of the screen here. So I'm just going to wait for that to disappear, and I'm just going to crawl up here and get rid of that. There we go. Yeah, so we're going to just switch back to the scores here. And basically, we evaluate scores on 5 different tiers. A tier 0 to tier 5. Tier 0 being the least intense, and tier 5 being the most intense. If a call comes in and it's evaluated at a tier 5, it really does go by way of a different way in the organization, where our staff psychologists are involved and our peer support unit is involved. Tier 0 is really a mundane call. And so we don't track this on system on this particular application. We track 1 through 4. So if you wanted to look at an average call in a tier 1, you could just click on this, and it would give you sort of the calls that we go: person in crisis, threats, person in crisis, injury, suicides. And what it does is the algorithm that you see, it goes in, and I'm just going to wait for that at the top part to just disappear. I wish that was at the bottom. I wish I had something that I could do. So anyways, you'll see that all these different calls come up, and what our algorithm does is it goes in and it picks out keywords in the call history, and then it assigns a score based on what it sees. If you wanted to look at your more serious calls, you could literally click on tier 4, and you'll see that these scores, weapons calls, you'll see homicides in here, murder, very serious calls, right? So you could track your calls that way. Essentially, what this does is it allows an officer to go back and look at his calls from a year, 2 years, 3 years over the course of time to see how did I do over those times. And let's say an officer would go to a call and wouldn't think about that call for 3 or 4 years. And all of a sudden he has a nightmare or a dream in the middle of the night, and he's thinking about this call, which is very common in the work that we do. This actually allows him to go back in time and look at that call in real time and say, oh, yeah, I forgot about this call. And they could look at it. And if it really bothered them, then they could go and talk to someone. I'll get to that a little bit later because you'll see how you can link to different parts of the system. So, yeah, so that's basically how that does that. Every call that you see or you go to now is ranked in terms of an intensity score. And you can either look at it by a score or a call volume. What a platoon supervisor would see would be the scores of their respective platoon. And as I've been doing this, I've been kind of looking at sort of platoons and seeing very high scores and very low scores. And what this allows a platoon supervisor to do is, if I have an officer that has, let's say, a score of 1,200 to 1,300 overall, and I've got officers that are at 500 to 600, which is a relatively moderate score, I may want to take that officer and put him in or switch areas with that officer, so to give him a bit of a break. And it also opens the door for a greater discussion from the supervisor and that individual to see how he's doing. Is he overwhelmed by what he's seen? And every one of our districts has peer support workers, but we also have a full-time embedded peer support worker who also uses this. And he looks at platoon scores and he looks at individual scores. And I got to really stress this. Scores aren't indicative of wellness issues. A lot of people are perfectly functional with a high score as compared to a low score. It doesn't matter. It has to be complemented by something else. And so when I train supervisors on how to use this, yes, the scoring system is good, but it has to be seen in concert with something else. Maybe there are some behavioral issues that you've noticed. Maybe this person was very engaged with his platoon a couple of years ago, where we have meetings in the morning, they're called parades. And he was very engaged on parades. He always gave an opinion and he always volunteered, or, if anyone needed help or whatever. And that has sort of ceased. Maybe this person had excellent deportment, right? And you've noticed that over time that deportment has slipped. Maybe this person was always early and now that person is now often late. There are other behavioral indicators that complement this system. And a switched on supervisor would be in the best position to sort of look at that from a complete perspective or a complete context. And if they were still unsure about it, they could engage our embedded peer support workers and have that discussion prior to speaking to the individual. Hey, this is what I've noticed in the behavioral indicators, and he has a very high score. And I know he's been to several sudden deaths in the last 6 months to 2 years, and a number of homicides, or a number of fatalities or traffic fatalities, right? Those are just discussions, right? And we'd like to say it's just a discussion. And at some point, the supervisor can elect to meet with the individual with the assistance and support of the embedded support worker or the embedded peer support member. And that often is just a check-in, right? To see if the organization can do anything to assist this individual. And is there any other thing that, as a sort of human-to-human contact, what could we do to assist this individual or this member? You'll often see, like, for example, person in crisis calls come in as a level 1, which is a lower intensity scale, but we'll often see them on level or an intensity score of 3 or 4 based on the wording that the algorithm picks out. Now, this is somewhat, I don't want to say archaic, but this goes back to 2017, 2018, when we designed this. AI has come a long way since then. And so if you were, as we get into sort of phase 2 and phase 3 of the app itself, we're hopeful that we can go into the reports and pull out the actual physical report and pull out the words from the report as well. Just to give it sort of a more informed score as opposed to just what we see. But this is pretty good. And I've been very surprised on how accurate it's been when I deal with members on particular calls. So yeah, it's very something that has worked really well for us, and I'm pretty certain. Now over here, you'll see score changes and call count changes. And really, that's really just something on a year-to-year basis. And I've never ever come across, an outstanding reason why that is so. There's always an explanation, right? Let's say that officer has a higher score or a score change of 400 to 500 more. Well, maybe they came out of an investigative unit. Maybe they were on the front desk working as an admin due to an injury or something along those lines. There's always a rational explanation for the change in score, whether it's up or down. There's not, so I don't put a lot of stock into that, other to say that he's more busy than they may have been last year. So now the second box we're going to look at is work-life balance. And this is very interesting. So we like to chart, sort of where our officers are doing in terms of, are they getting enough time to, when they get off work, are they having a physical break from York Regional Police, right? When we look at the spheres of wellness, right? One of the wellness spheres that we look at is the social sphere, right? And that is your family, that is your friends, that is people you like to hang out with. It's really vital that we take that time, not only in policing, but everything in life, where we go and we have a physical break for work. So this is actually designed to make sure that they are getting enough time off and a physical break from the actual service itself. And you'll see here, you'll have time off versus time on. So extra time on is going to include stuff like overtime. It's going to include stuff like court time, something we call change in schedule time, where they're asking you to come back to work an extra shift. So it really does give you sort of an overall picture of how much extra time you have on. And it also includes something called pay duty time. Now the one we created, unfortunately, doesn't have pay duty time on this because it goes into a different system, and we just couldn't merge it over. And there's some officers that do a lot of pay duties, right? And we're always concerned when we see that because, again, I'm not making a comment on any individual, but when we have an officer that's maybe doing 800 to 1,000 hours of pay duties a year, is that conflicting with what the time off that they need to recharge when they go home? And are they getting enough time with their family and their friends? So when they come back, they're sort of ready to hit the road running, and they've had that physical break. I like to look at it on this one here. This is kind of unique here. It gives you kind of a better optic in terms of your your time off versus your extra time on. I think that's kind of neat. So I like to use that one. But again, it's just showing you, to you're getting more time off and extra time on. Now, as you get into sort of different units, we've noticed that units like human trafficking, units like drugs, units such as professional standards, their extra time on is much greater than their time off. In fact, a lot of these officers are actually canceling time off because there's so much work that needs to get done. And that's a red flag. And I've worked with several senior officers across the organization to look at their units. And they were able to build really strong business cases to to scale up on staffing for their particular individuals when they saw that their staff wasn't getting the next extra time off, and that they needed more staff to come in and help because it was putting too much pressure on the officers that were working, and they were burning out much too fast, and they were wanting out. So this is a good tool for a supervisor to look at and say, hey, you know something, I may have an issue here, a unit-wide issue, and we have to address this. And really sort of that person that uses this business intelligence approach to sort of look at their unit to make sure that the workload is being offset by the time off that that officer should be entitled to. Now, just over on this side of the page over here, you'll see sick hours. I really don't care about sick hours in general. Sometimes, you know, back 30 years ago or 20 years ago, sick hours were kind of the sort of the benchmark or the litmus test, you know, to sort of say, I don't take any sick time. And right, that's changed in the last 10 years. People are entitled to sick time, whether it's family sick time or whether it's their own personal sick time. I don't judge. Everyone has issues now. But what we found, and this is really significant and it really surprised us, was there is a strong correlation between sick hours and significant events. So that officer may go to a significant call. And again, maybe it's, you know, a graphic call, maybe it's a traffic fatality, maybe it's a homicide call. And they go home that night and they're not feeling well the next day, but they don't know why they're not feeling well that day. You know, they seem to be fine at the call itself. But at the end of the day, they're sick or they have a headache or they couldn't sleep. That is associated to that call. So we have seen when we go back in time that there is a strong correlation between officers that take sick time following a significant or traumatic event. And that surprised us to some end. You know, you obviously you know we know that that follows, but usually those type of physical onset illnesses happen down the line and not so much so quick. But you know, having this tool to look at is, you know, re-emphasizes the importance of having a peer support unit that is very quick to respond to traumatic events. And we have that at York Regional Police. We have over 100 officers that are volunteer peer support workers. And we also have our embedded workers, and we also have our clinicians that will actually attend the parade the next morning or the next evening, depending on how the schedule falls, and speak to that parade about the event and remind them that there are resources, there's anonymity, and they want to speak to someone or someone wants to speak to an embedded worker or a clinician or another peer support worker, that option is there. And that has been met quite, what's the word I'm looking for? Very well received by our officers. And they actually use it. I mean, it's one thing to say it's great, but if the officers don't, you know, use it, then there's an issue. Our officers are now using this more frequently, which is a good sign because they understand that this is a long career, right? And one of the things I've really noticed as someone that's retiring, you know, in less than a year. So I went around to every parade and I talked to the platoons. Also, I talked to their supervisors. And more often than not, after my presentation was over, I would have an officer with 25 to 30 years on come up to me and say, how did you know about the nightmares? How did you know about the substance misuse? How did you know about the headaches? How did you know about, and all those stuff? I said, you know, I know because it's so common, but we don't talk about it, right? And so when I'm doing these presentations, it really does resonate with officers that have now, you know, gone through 25 years where we had an absence of peer support programs to now that we have a sort of a plethora of them. And it does really help them. And the most common comment I get is that I'm reaching out to help for help because, and I hear this over and over again, is because I actually don't want to take any baggage with me when I retire. So that to me is very refreshing. And sorry, I just have to go back in now because I lost my screen. So if you just bear with me, I'll go back in. Actually, I don't have to go back in. So that covers the work-life balance. So now we're going to go down to this screen here. And again, this screen is very unique. And I give our executive leadership team so much credit here because, and I'll get into that in a little bit. And so you look at the screen, there's not much happening, correct? It's kind of blank. And again, this is my screen, so you're not going to see much. But basically, this allows, so before I get into that, let me just give you a couple of examples before we get into this, because I think that provides greater context. Let me just start with this kind of story or this situation. Two officers go to a call. It's a missing elderly person call. And the person, let's say, may have a dual diagnosis. Maybe they suffer from dementia and Alzheimer's or some type of other, let's say, wellness issue. And you've got an officer that's got less than 5 years on, and you have an officer that's got 20 plus years on. And the age of the missing party is maybe he's 80 plus years or she's 80 plus years, and they've gone missing and they have dementia or Alzheimer's or both, let's say. Well, maybe that 25 plus year on veteran who's seen every call in the book has a similar situation at home. And that situation, let's say, is his greatest fear. He gets home one night and his mother or father has gone missing, and now he has to call the police because he has the exact same situation that he dealt with at work just literally 5 or 6 hours ago. And then you have an officer who's got less than 5 years on, and his mother and father are both in perfect health. And he doesn't give, this a second thought. It's just another call for him. All I'm trying to do here is just tell you is that there are, for every call that we go to, two different behavioral experiences or two different emotional experiences may result. And it may be different, like it may be different for both officers, right? And in this case, the missing person, right, resonates with that officer that has a very similar issue in his home life. And it doesn't resonate with that officer that has sort of perfect, his parents are in perfect health, right? Another example, and this is actual this is actual a real example. And so let me just go into this. So basically what this system does is it allows an officer to go in and change his intensity score from one particular score to a higher score or a lower score based on their experience. So how that happens is they click on this little icon down here. And that's going to take them to this page here. And basically, all they need to call up that call was an occurrence number. So I'm going to give you an example of a call that occurred in Stouffville. And I'll give you two because they're both really good. And these are live examples. So the first call, it came in as an assist ambulance call. Now this is just a made up one, so you're not looking at the real one. So they put what we call the go number or the incident number in, and it calls up the call. And in this case, the call was an assist ambulance call. So you'll see there, assist ambulance. We get this all the time. Not much information. So this was scored as a 0 by the automated system. Well, it turns out that actual call was a sudden death of an infant, which involved CPR. And the mother was I believe she was a civilian with the OPP, and the father was an OPP officer. And so it really resonated with the officers that went to that call because it was very, it was very similar to their, working with someone that we're all a brotherhood, we're all a sisterhood. And so when I debriefed the platoon, because of the CPR, because of the death, They all felt it was a 5. So we felt very strong that there should be a way for an officer to go in and change their score to reflect the experience that they had on that particular occasion. And you'll see here on the one side over here, you'll see tier 0 to tier 5. That just is sort of a key for the officers to look at the scores. And again, in that particular call, they all thought it was a tier 5. So in this case, all they need to do, and this was designed to be very quick for the officers to use, is hit the tier 5. We do ask for a little bit of a rationale, but not a great one. And so we created these generic bubbles to sort of give that option out. And in this case, CPR was used. There was a death of a child. And all they have to do is hit submit, and that will change their score from the 0 to a 5. And that will sort of alert sort of the peer support unit that there has been a change in the score, and that they can go, if they'd like to go and have a conversation as to, hey, you changed your score. Obviously you were kind of, it was kind of upsetting for you. Can we have a conversation? And that's all it is. It's just a conversation. You'll see that up at the top here. When this happens, we really don't monitor this. It's up to the individual to go and do this. No one can do it for them. We look at aggregate scores changing. We don't look at individuals, like an individual event changing. So we ask them if they want to reach out to use these links, our peer support link or our peer support unit link, and that'll take them right to an anonymous link. And all we ask them to do is do a very generic email. I was at a call. I'd like to speak to someone about it. And that's the end of it. It's all we want on email. If they do that, I like to say that we have support dogs also in our facility. We've got 2. And so when they change a score, they really, we don't put the dogs in the car. We don't race down there with lights and sirens on, and we don't put them in a room and ask them how they're doing. That does not happen. That wouldn't work for a police officer. I don't think they would feel threatened by that. But yeah, we do ask, we do see a bump up in terms of the score, and we would follow up based on that. There's other boxes here too. So the reason we use CPR, Naloxone, and tourniquet is that they're very up close and personal sort of experiences. A person can be taking his last breath. A person could be sort of bleeding out. So it's very up close and personal for that officer. And, they may, that's why we kind of centered them out. Death is obvious. Again, if they want more of an explanation, if you hover over the cursor, right, you'll see that you get a sort of a brief explanation of that. Child, this doesn't have to be a child in the conventional sense or the criminal code. It could be sort of a developmentally delayed adult who's portraying as a 13 or 14-year-old or an 8-year-old, right? It just depends on the experience that an officer has with that individual. Difficult arrest. We put this one in because, and I use my own example when I talk about this, because a lot of arrests, yes, it doesn't have to be a physical difficulty. It could be a moral issue, right? It could be a moral injury. So I remember when I worked down in our Vaughan station, I had to go arrest a faith leader. And that faith leader was the same faith that I had been brought up as, right? And so it did sort of create sort of a conflict within my own upbringing, my own core values, right? And so that was very difficult for me. Like, it wasn't an easy arrest. And, that's just one example. There are lots of different examples. So if an officer went through something which was a moral injury, they could use difficult arrest. Past experience. This was not in the first iteration of this, but this came out of the conversation that I had with an officer after I did a presentation. And she told me about a parking complaint. And I said, a parking complaint? Like, how is that going to be significant? And she said, well, it wasn't the call itself. It was the overt racism and misogynism that she endured during this call. And this officer had been to a number of calls over the course of her career, homicides, traffic fatalities, sex assaults. But the one call that she could not get past was this parking complaint where she was a target of racism. And that was the call that kept her up at night. And so we felt it really important to at least have sort of a way that she could go back and then change the score based on that experience. So we put this in. Graphic scene. Now it's very, this one's great because it got us into a conversation that we never thought we were going to have with our communicators. And the conversation centered around, is it worse to go to the call and see the gore, see the graphic nature of the call, or is it worse when you are a dispatcher and you hear what's going on, but you don't see the actual physical scene? So you're left with your own vivid creation of what the officer saw when they stepped in. And there's no right or wrong answer here, but it does go to show you that our communicators don't get closure for a lot of these calls. And when I was training, this is a true story. When I was training the communicators, a call came in. It was over the March break. And essentially, it was a 5 or 6-year-old boy that had called in. And he said that his parents were trying to kill him. And that they could hear screaming in the background. And he said that he had locked himself in the bathroom. Well, their job at that point is try to get as much information as they can get. And it's when I talk to them, the worst part for them is they're alone dealing with this person that's undergoing this great trauma within their lives. And they're watching a police car slowly go across a map, and they're just wanting for that police car to get there so quickly. But, that doesn't happen. It feels like an eternity for them. So they go through their own set of traumatic issues as they're dealing with this person. Now, in this case, it's kind of funny. The child had actually called police and made the whole story up because he stole his mother's credit card. And then he racked up a whole bunch of charges on online gaming the day before and got caught. So he was trying to sort of get past, that sort of, or at least try to avoid the consequences of what he'd done. But if you're a communicator and you don't know that, you just move on to the next call. Often officers will come on, over the air and say, all 10-4, everything's fine here. And that's kind of the end of the call. And they move on to the next call. So let's say they go home at night and they've got a 4 or 5-year-old boy. What's the first call they're going to think of when they get home? It's the call that they dealt with, and maybe they forgot because they just deal with so much, right? So we like to have that discussion with our communicators about, something. We realize that you don't have to go to a call to be affected by it. And that's well received. Injury involved, very sort of straightforward, I guess. Doesn't have to be the victim. It could be an officer. It could be a civilian. It could be, it might even be sort of a suspect, that becomes a suspect 2 weeks later. But often when we deal with persons that are injured, it does leave a sort of physical or emotional scar on us. This one here is also interesting, limited involvement. Much as an officer can scale up, they can go from a 0 to a 5 or a 4. An officer can often scale down, and we give them that option because, and they don't have to do it. But some officers just feel that they want to have an accurate picture of what's going on. So the classic example is you sort of an accident, a car accident. And maybe that was a traffic fatality, but that officer comes on scene 5 or 6 hours later. And really his only duty there is to sort of do some traffic control prior to the roads reopening, which is stressful. Don't get me wrong, but obviously it's not the same experience as the officers that arrived on scene, first and second and third dealt with, right? So if you want to scale down, you're welcome to scale down. We give officers that option. So yeah. And then the last thing they can do is hit submit, and that again, they can only submit their information. No one else can do this for them. This is just, it's on them, and that's very easy to use, as you can see. We also have a cell phone option where an officer can go on and do this over the cell phone as well. So we try to make it as easy and as quick as possible. So let me give me a second here. All right, so that's the call related experiences page. And again, I give our ELT a lot of credit here because as I said before, I get a lot of calls from not only Ontario, but all over the world regarding this system. And there's still a fair number of services that might be a little bit resistant to the fact that officers can go in and change a score. And when I drill down on that with people, they often say, well, can a person use this to manipulate a PTSD issue or an occupational stress issue? And I suppose they can do that with this, but they can do it, now without this system, right? Like it doesn't, in fact, this makes it probably a little bit more difficult. But where it does help is if I wanted, let's say I suffered from an occupational stress injury, and let's say I was unsuccessful with WSIB in getting insured benefits because my psychologist told me that I needed time off and I needed to go to some therapy for 6 months. Often that may not be covered by WSIB insurance, which means an officer would have to go to a tribunal and have an appeal hearing. Well, now at least the officer can go back, in this case with us, 2016 and 17, and look at all those calls that they've been to over the course of their careers, all the 4s and the 5s that they've experienced. So we often say, if you make the investment in your wellness on the front end by monitoring this and changing your scores, it really can pay dividends in the back end. In terms of you being able to go back in time and sort of looking at those calls and how they affected you over the course of the career. Because the first question they're going to ask you at a tribunal hearing is, tell us about the calls over the course of your police history that have affected you or affected your wellness in a negative way, right? And I'll be honest, when people do this, when they start to go back in time, because I've sat down with them when they go back, because we always like to have a peer support worker do this with a person as they go back, because they forget a lot of calls. And all of a sudden, they see a call that they forgot about 6 or 7 years ago. And that's very emotional for them, right? So we'd like to have our peer support workers with them as they go through this to make sure that they have support when they need it. And again, it goes a long way, that emotional or that sort of evidence-based sort of experience that they have now often goes and leads to successful appeals and them actually getting on WSIB a benefit. So, and WSIB is very receptive to that. So it's been great. So that does the experiences box. Now I'm going to turn to the last one here, which is my favorite. And now we're going to see this. This is all where they find our resources. So just give me a second here because I'm losing my voice. Okay. So the first thing we're going to look at, our resources that we have for our officers. And we're just going to click to this page here. And that takes us to our wellness portal. And I talked about the spheres of wellness. We have biological, psychological, social, spiritual, and our newest sphere is reintegration. And if an officer really wanted to look more at that in terms of our wellness strategy, it's there. We offer officers, I'm not sure how many people do this across the service, but we have basically an incentive program for wellness, and it's really good. Last year, I believe they got $140 in gift cards if they completed one aspect of each sphere. And for example, there's biological wellness, right? You can complete a fitness test. You could do a biohealth consult. We do have 3 biohealth consults, our staff now to do those consults on our staff. Or you can participate in a YRP walk, run. Now we've got our challenge going in November right now, our step challenge and our physical challenge. So you could do that. Our psychological sort of sphere. You could do a baseline assessment with one of our mental health clinicians. You could do a YRP mental health course. There's lots of them to choose from. Not the ones you see here. There's other ones as well. Or you could do our Avid program, which is it's an incentive-based activity in terms of getting officer to sort of consider wellness from the organizational level. There's social, again, lots of different things under social. So if you do all this, you can, if you get one tick in each box, you would qualify for those gift cards, which I think is fantastic. I'm trying to get on, go on and, check your members wellness dashboard once a week. That, I think that would really kind of drive the numbers for me, but I'm kind of greedy that way. So I don't often sort of, get people to do that much, but once a month is good. And this is my favorite one here. It's YRP Peer Support Resources. So what this does is when you become a peer supporter with York Regional Police, you are asked to identify certain cadres where you would like to, so I just has to load over here. It's got to bring this over a little bit. Okay. All right. So this allows an officer, if they wanted to speak to a peer support worker about an issue, this allows them to sort of identify officers that have become peer supporters. And at the bottom here, you'll see different things. So let's say I'm retiring next year. So let's say I had some anxiety about retirement. I could merely click on the box here, and that would take me to a whole bunch of officers that have gone through the retirement process. And if I wanted to reach out to them and ask them about retirement, I could either pick someone that I know, or I could pick someone that I don't know. Some people want to speak to people they know. Some people are perfectly comfortable talking to a stranger. There are officers that, may think they have PTSD. They could reach out to anyone here that's on the list. Again, they don't have to know them, but I give them a lot of credit because they actually are quite vulnerable in their bios, and that's difficult to do as, for anybody. It's especially, I think, especially that vulnerability for police officers and first responders. So again, it just allows you that opportunity to go in and look at people that you could reach out to for help during your time that you might need it. So that is the Wellness Members Dashboard. I'm going to stop sharing. And we've got about 10 minutes for questions and answers. So I'll turn it back over to Alex.
Yeah, I think there's a few comments at the chat line, and there's a question on the Q&A section. So yeah, I mean, for the question, yeah, I don't know if you could see it, Jason, but I'm happy to read it. It's the first question is, do you find all officers? So it's two-part questions. Do you find all officers are using the supports being provided somewhat equally, no matter their time with the service? And the second part of that is also, do you have any recommendations or techniques for managing resistance amongst officers when it comes to accessing peer support or even your EAP?
Yeah, it's funny. It's a very good question, because I have noticed a difference. And I think the younger generation is much more receptive to wellness discussions and how they may have been affected by a call. I still think when you get to that 20 plus years on, I still think people are grounded in what the environment that they were brought up into, where it still might be seen as weakness. But even that's changing, right? So I would say that younger officers are very quick to understand why we're doing this, and understand why making that investment in your wellness at an early stage in their career can pay the dividends at the back end when they get to 20 plus 25 years on. And again, I get a lot of senior officers now calling me directly to talk about, where they're at in terms of their career and their wellness. So even that's been changing, which I think is really positive. But I work for a really great organization. Our deputies and our chief have embraced this wholeheartedly. And I know that's not the case in all police services. But at the end of the day, all I can say is I've had a lot of interest in this, and I think times are changing. It could be a generational change. But at least we're heading with momentum in that direction.
Right. So
That's the another one. Yeah.
yeah, there's another. Go ahead, Vixen.
Yeah. Why would some services be adverse to allowing officers to change their score? And I think there's just that, and I don't want to say mistrust, but I think there's still some fear that people will use this to their own benefit. Again, I don't see why they would do that. But it is a discussion that has come up over and over again. And I think it goes back to the environment that they were kind of raised in, by in their experience within a particular service. So I just think there's that overriding fear that they could use this to manipulate something in themselves into something like a PTSD, which I really don't think is possible. Or an OSI, which is, it's not easy to do. And I'll give the WSIB a ton of credit. They are really good at sort of looking at, legitimate cases and kind of saying, well, this is legitimate and this isn't so legitimate, right? So, and for anyone that's ever been through the appeal process, it's not an easy thing to go through, and it's certainly not an easy thing to fake. So if you want to do that, I'm not judging anybody, but it's just not that easy to do. All right, thank you for your response. Is exactly what I wanted to. Okay, that's good. Okay, did I miss anything? Sorry. Alex?
No. There's a few great comments up above. So from Constable Frank Gardell, the OPP could learn a thing or two from this program wellness approach.
Actually,
right.
I have been in contact with the OPP. I've done several presentations, and I know that they are very interested in doing something. It's just a matter of cost and a matter of organizational priority, right? And I know that they wouldn't have had me back 3 or 4 times and talking to, their peer unit and their BI teams about this. So I would be surprised that the OPP doesn't have something shortly out, which is similar to this, or at least something that allows officer to track their wellness based on every service is unique. Every service has its own sort of nuances and whatnot. So, would it look exactly like this? I don't think so. I think you'd get something, but it may not look exactly what we've developed. So
there's another question, and by the way, to the audiences, if you want to say your questions directly to Sergeant McIlveen, please do so. Unmute yourself and just do so. But there's another question from a colleague actually at CMHA. Do you receive any feedback from officers who think this system is too intrusive?
That's funny because I did talk about the ability to scale up, but also scale down. And that actually arose out of a few conversations that we had, that people were concerned that if they had a high score, they would be let's say they applied to a different unit. Let's say they wanted to go from uniform, where they had a very high score, and they wanted to go to somewhere like drugs and vice or human trafficking, which, have notoriously high scores because the work volume is so high. They felt that they might be passed over because they might be seen as on the verge of burnout. And it's like anything else. They had this impression that the organization wouldn't invest in all the time and the money for training that it takes to bring an officer up to that level of investigative status, if they felt that they would be leaving in a year or two because of burnout. It's like anything, they want to return on their investment of 3 or 4 years before. That is not true. That is so not true. That doesn't happen. And in fact, officers only have access to their particular dashboard. No one can shop around. You know, the peer support workers have access to everybody because they'll be dealing with everybody. Supervisors can see their respective platoons, but they can't go platoon shopping. And so it's very limited in terms of the information that they get, for in terms of what they can see. So again, it just doesn't sort of, that fear, really doesn't, there's not a lot of merit to it, but we put that sort of ability to scale down to sort of appease that type of reception. And there wasn't a lot, but there was a few. And I suspect that would be, people that would think that that system is too intrusive. But I never had I never had a peer support worker call me, because they've reached out to a person to do a check-in. So that's a good thing.
Great. Well, yeah, I think we're coming to the end of our session.
Yeah.
Thank you, Staff Sergeant Jason McIlveen. I mean, for me personally, I'm on the business side of this of CMHA, so it's always so fascinating and interesting to hear from you, to hear stories like you just mentioned earlier. So thank you for that. I'd also like to, for the audience, please join me in thanking our speaker for the great presentation and for sharing his knowledge with us. Please take a moment to fill the survey for this session by clicking on the agenda in the platform. Choose the session you're currently attending, and then next to the join button, you will find a survey button. Click on that survey button and then complete the short survey. We encourage you to take some time to connect with fellow participants and visit our poster and exhibitor halls, where you can view poster presentations and connect with our exhibitors. Don't forget to add resources from our exhibitors to your personal swag bag. And then to build your own agenda by adding sessions to your calendar, click the Add to Calendar button. We would appreciate if you could also take a few moments to complete our conference evaluation. You could access this by clicking on the evaluation icon on the conference homepage in the menu bar. So thank you once again, Sergeant McIlveen, and every one of you participating in the insightful questions. We will now be taking an hour's break for lunch from noon to 1 p.m. We will have lunchtime session starting at 12:15 to 12:45 called Peer Support in Action, the Young Adult Cannabis Harm Reduction Digital Storytelling Project. Then following lunch at 1 p.m., please join us for our keynote speaker, Guy Feliciala. To join the keynote session, click on the agenda link on the menu bar, then click on join. And then our D-series concurrent sessions will follow after the afternoon break, so at 2:30 p.m. So click on the agenda in the platform and choose the session in the D-series that you would like to join, and then click that join button. Other than that, thank you so much. And again, thank you again, Jason. It was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Avery.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.